Welcome to the Darrell McClain Show. I'm your host, Darrell McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Of intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor, to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the Morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Welcome to the Darrell McClain Show, independent media that won't reinforce tribalism. We have one planet. Nobody is leaving, so let us reason together. We're going to start this show off today with a show question. The Luigi Mangioni's lawyers are asking for the case to be tossed out on the basis that police failed to read him his Miranda rights when they went through the actions of arresting him. In your opinion, how will this play out? Thank you for the question. So, let me do it like this. Let me pull this chair up here and get this scotch going, because now I get to go to a story that hits the crossroads of law, power, and what I think is one of the most misunderstood phrases in American policing, which is, they didn't read me my rights. And yeah, those famous Miranda rights, the ones that people treat like a magical shield that makes handcuffs fall off and charges vanish like smoke from a Sunday altar. But this time, it's not some random street rumor. This time, it's showing up in a courtroom of Luigi Mangioni, whose lawyers are trying to toss out this case because they say police arrested him without reading him said rights. Now look, as we discussed on the previous episode, I've worn the badge as a Master at Arms of the United States Navy for Federal Protective Services and under the Department of Homeland Security. I've been the guy doing the questioning and the guy reading the rights and the guy who knows exactly why the courts take this so seriously. And I know exactly why Hollywood lied to everybody about how this stuff actually works. So here's what I'm going to do tonight, and I'm going to break this down clean, sharp, with no sugar, no theatrics, just the truth, because this case isn't just about Mangioni. It's about what happens when the public understanding of policing meets the actual legal mechanisms behind the scenes. It's about rights, responsibilities, and the thin, fragile line between authority and abuse. And I'm going to tell it in a way that your uncle, your cousin, your grandma, and your lawyer can all understand. So, number one, they didn't read me my rights is a urban legend. Somewhere along the way, America has convinced itself that no Miranda rights equals no case. Like if the police forget to read one sentence, the courthouse suddenly, the doors just slide open, and like Walmart at 8 a.m. and everybody runs free and the charges dissolve into the wind. But that's not actually how the law works. That's just how reality TV works. And the truth is simpler and way less cinematic. Miranda protects your words, not your charges. It protects your statements, not your circumstances. Police actually don't have to read you your rights when they detain you. They don't have to read you your rights when they arrest you. They only have to read you them when two particular things collide. One, you're in custody, not free to walk away. Two, they're interrogating you and asking you questions meant to get incriminating answers. Now, if these two conditions don't meet at the altar, no Miranda wedding, no violation. And it's amazing how many people don't know that includes people who should. But here's the other side of that coin. When Miranda is required and the police fail to read it, oh, buddy, that's a cause for some legal earthquakes. No case, no ending newts, but quakes. Now, here's the second point. What Miranda actually does, and this is the part that nobody wants to hear, so I'm going to put it very bluntly. If the cops failed to read you your Miranda rights and Mirandaize you, the judge doesn't erase reality. Evidence doesn't vanish, and guns don't disappear. Videos don't evaporate, and witnesses don't suddenly lose their memories. The court doesn't hit the delete crime button, but what the court can do, and what Mangioni lawyers are betting on, is this: it will suppress everything he said after he was effectively arrested. So no statement, no confession. No, I didn't mean to. No, what happened was, in his words, if his words were the backbone of the case, then the spine collapses. If the words were just seasoning on the case, then the dish will still hold up. But here's when it gets interesting. Courts also look at police credibility. Judges remember sloppy work, defense attorneys smell blood, juries raise eyebrows, and Miranda violation is sometimes just like pulling a loose thread because you don't know what fabric unveils until you actually tug on the thread. The next point is, so what's Mangioni's lawyers actually arguing here? Mangioni's lawyers are basically saying, hold up, when police approached him, they weren't just detaining him. They were performing the actions of an arrest, controlling his movement, limiting freedom, issuing commands, acting like the cuffs were already on, meaning he was in custody. So when they questioned him without Miranda rights, they're acting as if so, then that would mean anything that he said in that period of time would be tainted. Now, that's a smart argument. It's debatable, but it's still a smart argument. Because it forces the courts to answer one question: at what exact moment did the encounter become an arrest? Because let me tell you, as someone who's worn the badge, police love the phrase, "he wasn't under arrest, we were just investigating." That line there has saved more confessions than any miracle in the book of Acts. The defense, meanwhile, loves the phrase, "a reasonable person wouldn't feel free to leave." So you got this thing where police are going to argue technical procedure, and the defense attorneys are going to argue lived reality. And a judge will have to decide whose version of freedom counts. And that is the whole chessboard. Now, there are three ways this can play out. And let me give you only three scenarios that matter. And the first one is the rare when statement suppress, cases collapse. If his statements are the case, the core, the heart, the skeleton, then losing them guts the prosecution. The judge won't dismiss the case outright because of Miranda, but they'll dismiss because the evidence becomes too weak to stand on its own two legs. That's the defense's Hail Mary. Possible? Yes. Common? Actually not. The second scenario, the likely outcome is the statements are suppressed, cases will limp forward. Now, this is where my money usually lands. His statements gets tossed, the prosecution gets embarrassed, the judge issues a stern warning, and the case survives just a lot uglier. Why? Because if they got a video, witnesses, physical evidence, prior reports, independent corroboration, his silence actually won't save him. The state builds around the missing pieces and will just keep marching towards a trial or possibly a guilty verdict. Now, the third scenario is the police win and the judge says Miranda wasn't required. Now, this is when the court decides, look, he wasn't under arrest yet. He was detained, questions were routine, and no Miranda rights were needed. If that happens, everything he says comes into the clean and shiny, and the defense is cooked medium well. So my personal and professional take is this. This isn't actually a slam dunk. Mangioni's lawyers are doing what any good defense team would do, which is attacking the procedure, not the crime. It's smart, it's strategic, but it is still an uphill battle. Courts don't dismiss charges for Miranda violations. They just toss out words that were illegally obtained. So the real question is this. How much of the state's case depends on Mangioni's mouth? If the prosecution can't stand without his statements, then the whole thing may collapse like a poorly built altar. But if the prosecution has real evidence, then his legal team just trimmed one branch off the tree, but the tree still remains. Now, the bigger story behind the headline is this, and this is why this matters beyond Mangioni. In a country where trust in the police is fractured, where communities feel over-policed yet underprotected, where the rights are often recited but not respected, the procedure matters as much as the crime, because the Constitution doesn't bend for convenience, and Miranda isn't a declaration, it's a protection. So when police cut corners, it just doesn't endanger cases, it endangers public trust. And when the public doesn't understand how rights actually work, that misunderstanding becomes gasoline in every argument about justice. Mangioni is just one man, but the question raised by this case, it belongs to all of us. What does freedom actually mean in the United States of America? Who defines custody? And how do we balance safety and civil rights? How do we uphold the law without breaking the Constitution? So tonight, we're diving deep into all of that, and we're going to do it with clarity, with honesty, and a kind of moral backbone the country needs. This is the Ron McClain Show, and we are just getting started. We'll be right back in a moment.
When we talk about whether police fail to read someone their rights, we're not dealing with the technicality invented by lawyers. We're dealing with 90 years of American legal struggle. Here's the historical arc that matters. 1. 1930s, 1950s, the era of coerced confessions. Courts regularly upheld confessions obtained through sleep deprivation, beatings, intimidation, threats, psychological manipulation. The turning point was Brown v. Mississippi. 1936, the Supreme Court said torture-induced confessions violate due process. This case becomes the root of everything the Mangioni defense is now pulling from. 2. The 1950s, 1960s police soft torture and secret interrogations after physical coercion became legally risky. Departments leaned on prolonged questioning, denying counsel, holding suspects for hours or days, trick tactics. This forced the courts to expand protections. Escobedo v. Illinois, 1964, required police to honor requests for lawyers. 3. Miranda v. Arizona, 1966. The Miranda decision formalized the warning so suspects understood. The right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, that statements could be used against them. Before Miranda, you could be interrogated without ever being told you had choices. 4. The 1970s-1990 CEF, police skirting Miranda departments experimented with pre-Miranda questioning, non-custodial interviews, and the infamous public safety exception from New York v. Quarles, 1984. The modern Miranda law was forged through officers pushing the boundaries and courts trying to tether them back. 5. Dickerson v. United States 2000, Congress tried to replace Miranda with a weaker standard. The court said no, Miranda is constitutional, not optional. So when Mangioni's lawyers say police acted like they were arresting him, here, tapping into 80 years of Supreme Court rulings affirming that rights aren't window dressing. Their inherited protections built out of decades of abuses. His case isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a long American fight about how much the state can pressure a citizen before the Constitution kicks in.
Don't say good morning. Guess what tomorrow is, eh?
Well, it's not my birthday, so it's just another Tuesday as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, not just another Tuesday. It's Giving Tuesday.
That's right. That's forgotten.
Yeah, and NPR celebrates this global day of generosity every year, but we've never had a year quite like this one before.
Right, and everyone out there probably by now has heard that federal funding for public media was eliminated as of October 1st. That means NPR is now operating without federal support for the first time in our history. That's more than 50 years. And it's a big change, also a big challenge, but one that we definitely can overcome together.
Right, overcome it because of our listeners. You count on Up First to bring you the news you need to start your day, and we're so grateful to the listeners who have already stepped up to donate for this program. Like Rika in Tennessee, who says, every day I listen to Up First in the car after I drop my kids off at school. It allows me to stay connected and informed with honest, eloquent reporting. Your show helps me stay educated and engaged.
Oh, she called me eloquent. Thank you so much, Rika, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.
And you can be like Rika, too. Please make your Giving Tuesday gift right now by signing up for NPR Plus. Thank you for coming to us for your news, for trusting us, and for supporting us. It's a simple, recurring donation that gets you perks across NPR's podcasts, and you'll be supporting public media while you listen. Join us at plus.npr.org.
The White House is tightening legal immigration pathways after last week's shooting of 2 National Guard members.
Because the suspect was Afghan, the administration is now pausing all asylum decisions. How else is it limiting legal immigration?
I'm Martinez, that's Layla Fadel, and this is Up First from NPR News. U.S. strikes in the Caribbean are under bipartisan scrutiny, and now some lawmakers say Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth may have violated international law when he reportedly gave an order to kill everyone aboard one of the alleged drug boats.
This rises to the level of a war crime, if it's true.
We'll hear how the Trump administration is responding.
And Ukraine heads into a new round of peace talks without its top negotiator. President Zelensky's right-hand man resigned in a corruption scandal, so how will the shakeup impact Ukraine's hand at the bargaining table? Stay with us. We'll give you the news you need to start your day.
This message comes from Grammarly. They have features that are tailor-made for working professionals, so you can get all your writing done from start to finish, all in one place. Grammarly is designed to help professionals with real-time writing support on any project, email, and more. Sign up for free and experience how Grammarly can elevate your professional writing from start to finish. Visit Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly.com/podcast. This message comes from BetterHelp. As a dad, BetterHelp president Fernando Madera relates to needing flexibility when it comes to scheduling therapy.
I have kids under 18, so time is very limited. That's why at BetterHelp, our therapists try to have sessions, sometimes at night, depending on the therapist, or during the weekend. So I think that's what we need to tell the parents. You're not alone. We can help you out.
If a flexible schedule would help you, visit BetterHelp.com/NPR for 10% off your first month of online therapy.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over-opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over-Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over-opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott, where he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth. We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com, because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out, her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.vslay.com. That is www.vslay.com.
The White House is moving fast to tighten legal immigration reviews after last week's shooting of 2 National Guard members here in Washington.
The suspect is Afghan national Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, who's been charged with first-degree murder. He was granted asylum earlier this year after coming to the U.S. under a Biden-era program that facilitated temporary legal status for people who work with the U.S. military in Afghanistan.
NPR's Jimena Bustillo covers immigration policy for us and joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
What are the changes the administration announced after the shooting?
We're going to be talking about a few different types of immigration processes. First, the administration paused all asylum decisions and also visa reviews for people from Afghanistan. An order from the State Department also pauses the special immigrant visa for Afghans, which is a specific program for those who helped the U.S. military and its allies. To be clear, the suspect was not on that visa, but like you mentioned, had been granted asylum earlier this year under the Trump administration. Second, Joseph Edlow, the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, said anyone who applies for a green card from one of 19 countries on a list will face heightened scrutiny, and that list includes Afghanistan. Trump officials argue that those who came to the U.S. under former President Biden through these legal processes were not vetted properly. Still, in an interview with NBC's Meet the Press, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said investigators have other leads.
But I will say, we believe he was radicalized since he's been here in this country. We do believe it was through connections in his home community and state, and we're going to continue to talk to those who interacted with him, who were his family members, to talk to them. So far, we've had some participation.
So it's unclear what prior vetting could have uncovered.
Okay, what other restrictions is the administration talking about?
These changes came days after the administration said it would review refugee status of those already living in the U.S. A refugee is a person outside the U.S. who is forced to flee their home country due to violence, persecution, or other issues that put them in danger. The process can take years of vetting before someone is approved to enter the U.S. Now, the administration is reconsidering those already here. I obtained a memo issued by the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services late last month. That memo calls for reviewing all refugees admitted into the country under the Biden administration, essentially reopening their cases. They may need to be re-interviewed, and some may lose their status. The memo says the agency should, quote, only admit refugees that can fully and appropriately assimilate. Immigration advocates have called the recent changes on refugee reviews, visa, and green card applications deeply destabilizing to families already in the U.S.
And that's very broad, refugees who can fully and appropriately assimilate. What about asylum cases from other countries?
Right. Asylum, a different process. And as I mentioned, all asylum applications were paused after the shooting. During that interview yesterday with NBC's Meet the Press, Noam said asylum reviews would restart when the agency has, quote, dealt with the backlog. There is a 1 million case backlog at USCIS. For now, the administration is likely to continue to scrutinize not just those who want to come to the U.S., but also those who are already here.
Thank you. That's NPR's Jimena Bustillo.
Thank you.
Some U.S. lawmakers on both sides of the aisle say at least one of President Trump's attacks against a boat in the Caribbean Sea may have been a war crime.
So far, U.S. military forces have destroyed 21 boats that the administration says were trafficking drugs and killed 83 people without publicly releasing evidence that the boats were actually carrying drugs. Meanwhile, Venezuela is warning that the U.S. intends to invade the country and seize its oil reserves.
For more, we now go to John Otis, who is covering the story from neighboring Colombia. John, the UN says these American strikes violate international law. Some U.S. lawmakers now have raised the issue of war crimes, but there is no declaration of war against Venezuela.
Yeah, that's correct. There's no formal war between the two countries, but Trump has said that he's waging war against Venezuelan drug traffickers. And as you mentioned, U.S. forces have destroyed more than 20 alleged drug boats, killing more than 80 people. But the Washington Post reported that following one of the first strikes back in September, there were initially 2 survivors clinging to the boat wreckage. According to the Post, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had given an order to kill everyone aboard alleged drug boats, and that this order led to a second strike in which those survivors were killed. Here's Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, speaking on the CBS News program Face the Nation.
If that reporting is true, it's a clear violation of the DOD's own laws of war, as well as international laws about the way you treat people who are in that circumstance. And so this rises to the level of a war crime, if it's true.
Hegseth has called the Post report fake news, and Trump, speaking with reporters last night on Air Force One, backed him up. But the House and Senate Armed Services Committees have vowed to increase oversight of the boat strikes.
Now, President Trump has been warning airlines to steer clear of Venezuelan airspace. So what does that mean about a possible attack?
Yeah, ever since his first term, Trump has been pushing for regime change in Venezuela. Its president, Nicolas Maduro, has crushed the country's democracy and its economy, prompting about 8 million Venezuelans to flee overseas. Trump has also confirmed that he recently talked to Maduro on the phone, though he didn't provide any details. On Sunday, Venezuela's Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, read a statement from Maduro claiming that this is all about oil.
Venezuela denuncia que el gobierno de los Estados Unidos de América pretende.
Now, here she's saying Venezuela formally accuses the U.S. government of trying to take control of Venezuela's vast oil reserves. But experts say that 15,000 U.S. troops based on warships in the Caribbean are not enough to take control of Venezuela. Trump could instead order limited attacks on Venezuelan territory, or he might just stick to these boat strikes.
Now, John, while all this is happening, President Trump has suddenly announced that he has plans to pardon a former Honduran president who was convicted of drug trafficking. So why that? Why now?
Yeah, the timing on this is quite strange amid Trump's anti-narcotics campaign and just before the Honduran presidential election that took place on Sunday. But Trump has also been quick to defend former presidents elsewhere in the world who get into legal hot water. Juan Orlando Hernandez is a former Honduran president who was sentenced last year in the U.S. to 45 years in prison for helping to traffic more than 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. Without providing any evidence, Trump claimed that Hernandez was, quote, set up by the Biden administration and that he deserves a full pardon.
That's John Otis reporting from the Colombian capital of Bogota. Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks.
This week sees the U.S. again ramping up diplomatic efforts to end the war in Ukraine.
A senior White House delegation hosted Ukrainian negotiators on Sunday, and more talks are expected when U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff heads to Moscow later today.
Joining us to talk about the state of play is NPR's Charles Maines, who joins us on the line from Moscow. Hi, Charles.
Morning, Layla.
Okay, so let's begin with this weekend's negotiations. What can you tell us?
Yeah, sure. So on Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, along with White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, of course, the son-in-law of the president, hosted a Ukraine delegation for talks in Florida, which has emerged as kind of a nexus for Ukraine-related diplomacy in recent weeks. Discussions were focused on this new U.S. peace plan, initially criticized as heavily tilted in Russia's favor, but since amended with input from Ukraine and Europe. Now, Rubio called the meeting productive, even as he made clear there was plenty more work to do. He also had this to say.
We don't just want to end the war, we also want to help Ukraine be safe forever. So never again will they face another invasion. And equally importantly, we want them to enter an age of true prosperity.
Now, this meeting was also notable because of a shift in the makeup of the Ukrainian delegation. That's after a corruption scandal led to the resignation of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, who had been the lead negotiator with the U.S. How much that influenced the talks is tough to say. Trump, in brief comments to journalists Sunday, referred to the corruption scandal as a little problem. Rubio didn't mention it at all.
Okay. Now, White House envoy Steve Witkoff is expected in Moscow soon. Any sense of what he can expect?
Yeah, he arrives later today and will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin either tonight or tomorrow. But Witkoff has his own baggage. Recently leaked transcript of an audio recording reported by Bloomberg News certainly appeared to show Witkoff actively coaching the Kremlin on how to engage with Trump and working with them to incorporate key Russian talking points into the original draft of the peace plan. That said, Trump has dismissed this as basically deal-making 101. And Putin also defended Witkoff, saying, yeah, he's a polite and intelligent guy who tried to work with us. And wouldn't it be strange if he'd come here and just insulted us and expected to get anything done?
So, okay, Witkoff and Putin have some rapport, as I hear there. Trump says he does as well with Putin, but has that translated into any actual flexibility in the Russian position?
It's a good question, because Putin, it seems, is trying to tempt the U.S. into upping the pressure on Ukraine to accept a deal. On Friday, he offered an immediate end to hostilities if Ukraine withdraws from territory Moscow claims, which may sound appealing if you ignore that it's Ukrainian land that Russia hasn't been able to seize in more than 3 years of fighting, although Putin argues it's just a matter of time. Meanwhile, Russia has been tempting the U.S. in other ways. Putin's negotiators, they constantly talk about how much money the U.S. could make in Russia once the war ends and sanctions are lifted, which is why some of these statements out of Florida were interesting to hear. They suggest the U.S. now sees prosperity, business deals as key to a lasting peace. The question is, to what degree are they seen as a substitute for Western security guarantees for Ukraine that Kyiv has always sought and Moscow has always rejected?
That's NPR's Charles Maines in Moscow. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
And that's Up First for Monday, December 1st. I'm Layla Falden.
And I'm Martinez. If you enjoy starting your day with Up First and our radio show Morning Edition, and I know that you do, please consider donating to your local NPR station. It goes to supporting reporters in your communities and also around the world. So keep the NPR network strong. Visit donate.npr.org/upfirst to contribute.
Today's episode of Up First was edited by Anna Yukononov, Tara Neal, Miguel Macias, Mohamed El-Radisi, and Lisa Thompson. It was produced by Ziad Butch, Mia Dumas, and Christopher Thomas. We had engineering support from Stacey Abbott, and our technical director is Carly Strange. Join us again tomorrow.
Want to hear this podcast without sponsor breaks? Amazon Prime members can listen to Up First sponsor-free through Amazon Music. Or you can also support NPR's vital journalism and get Up First Plus at plus.npr.org. That's plus.npr.org.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, this is Sherry Hazard, and I'm really sorry to interrupt, but my podcast, The Folium Diary, is entering its last few weeks, and things are getting strange. I post a new episode every night at 9. Don't worry, they're short and sweet, like me. We've covered anarchy and astrology, decolonization and doppelgangers, Halloween with Frankenstein. That was fun. Start on page 1 and you'll catch up in no time. Please join me at the Folium Diary for a new episode every night until the season finale on New Year's Eve. Thanks.
Public radio is as American as apple pie. This Giving Tuesday is our first without federal funding. We need you to keep this American tradition alive. Give now at donate.npr.org.
On the next through line from NPR, the mother of Thanksgiving. If every state should join in Union Thanksgiving on the 24th of this month, would it not be a renewed pledge of love and loyalty to the Constitution of the United States? Listen to Throughline in the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Darrell McClain Show. Now, let me speak to you in a plain manner so you can understand why you just heard what you heard. If America is a house, then in my observation, NPR and PBS are the last two windows that aren't fogged up with straight propaganda, with straight corporate cash, and with straight political tantrums. They are the quiet place where the nation can still think before it speaks, where curiosity is still sacred, and where the volume is low, that low speaking voice they have, but the depth is very high. I have been listening to PBS and NPR for years, even when I was a staunch neoconservative. And in times like these, quiet truth is very powerful. Quiet truth is revolutionary because we live in a moment where information is unfortunately treated like a fast food meal. It is cheap, it is addictive, and it is engineered to keep you clicking on things instead of thinking about things. Outrage is merchandised. Misinformation is monetized. And politicians play talk show hosts, and talk show hosts pretend to be prophets. And in the middle of that circus, you have NPR and PBS, steady, unbothered, unpurchased, doing the unglamorous work of real journalism and attempting at real education. NPR doesn't need to scare you to stay on the air. PBS doesn't need to lie to you to keep their sponsors. They don't chase controversy. They chase clarity. That alone, to me, makes them worth protecting. They're the ones who still believe in a conversation, and that a conversation should be longer than a soundbite. A documentary can still tell the truth without the CGI explosiveness, and children's shows can build a character, not just their attention span. And a news story can be about facts, not just poll-tested talking points or poll-tested party lines. Now, PBS, personally, when I was growing up, it taught me and a lot of the other American people the alphabet before Twitter was a thing. PBS raised half of this country's kids on Sesame Street, and Sesame Street served more families than half of the politicians who actually claim to care about your children. And NPR is that friend who doesn't show up yelling, they show up quietly and slowly explaining. They're the ones who say, hold on, let's walk through this together, where every other platform is screaming, where every other platform is panic, where every other platform is fire check, wherever it's panic first, fact check later, or fact check never. Opinion, 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 opinion. And that matters. See, a democracy or a republic isn't maintained by noise. It is maintained by informed people. And a republic doesn't survive on slogans. It survives on citizens who understand their world deeply enough not to be played like violins every single election cycle. PBS and NPR are safeguards against ignorance. Public service journalism and public education in their purest form. And yet, they are constantly attacked. Not because they're biased, no, because they refuse to be biased, because they refuse to be bought, because they refuse to take a left or right side, because they have the audacity to put the truth, public truth, above profit, because they aren't loyal to parties or politicians, they are loyal to the public that will always rub against private power. You cut PBS, you're cutting off the nation's early childhood education. You cut NPR, and you're dimming one of the latest lanterns of thoughtful reporting in a darkening media landscape. Supporting them isn't about supporting my nostalgia. It's not about tote bag or Italians or soft jazz that they play between segments. It's about survival, intellectual survival, civic survival, moral survival. And if we're serious, truly serious, about passing down a better country than the one we inherited, then we must invest in the institutions that cultivated the minds of people and not try to manipulate them. NPR and PBS don't just inform America, they elevate it. So yes, I do support them, and I hope that you would too. Support them, fund them, defend them, because the day NPR and PBS go silent is the day we lose one of the most important and last mirrors that shows us who we really are and who we might want to become. If you can, and I know it's hard, think about funding PBS and NPR.
"10 athletes, 500,000 fears." How America Turned a Statistical Blip into a Spiritual Crisis. Jerome McLean, November 13th, 2025. The Arithmetic of Fear. 10 athletes out of 500,000. That's the real number, not the headline, not the hysteria. 10 transgender college athletes out of more than 500,000 NCAA competitors. A fraction so small it should disappear into the margins of statistical noise. And yet, somehow, this microscopic figure has managed to set entire legislatures ablaze, drive policy across dozens of states, and become a new front in America's unending culture war. It's worth asking, how does a decimal point become a doomsday? The answer isn't about sports. It's about the soul of a nation addicted to fear, a people who no longer know how to distinguish a symbol from a threat. Because when America panics, math doesn't matter. Myth does. And the myth at the center of this new crusade is simple. That womanhood itself is under siege, that somewhere in the dark corners of locker rooms and podiums, civilization is being rewritten by a handful of confused college kids. That's not reason, that's theater, and the audience keeps buying tickets. The anatomy of a panic, if you've studied history, this isn't new. Every generation invents a scapegoat to project its unease. During the Cold War, it was communists in the classroom. During Reconstruction, it was the image of the black man at the ballot box. Today is trans athletes the perfect villain for a society teetering between old certainties and new realities. 10 athletes, and suddenly we are meant to believe that fairness itself is collapsing. The moral panic doesn't flow from data, it flows from symbolic contagion. 10 athletes aren't dangerous. But the idea that categories are shifting, that biology and identity are being renegotiated, strikes something ancient in us. It reminds us how fragile our definitions really, and fear, when properly marketed, is profitable. Politicians found they could raise money, stir voters, and score headlines simply by claiming to protect women's sports. Governors and state legislators discovered that a law restricting a problem that barely exists could still make them look like warriors for virtue. They know exactly what they're doing. The protection isn't for women. It's for their own power. Because in the modern political economy, outrage is currency, and the smaller the incident, the purer the panic. Trita. The theater of protection, let's not kid ourselves. Some people in this debate are arguing in good faith. They genuinely worry about fairness in competition, about the physiological differences that may exist. Those are valid conversations, but that's not what's happening here. This isn't a debate. It's a ritual. The phrase protecting women's sports has become a kind of secular liturgy. It's recited not for clarity, but for absolution, to convince the speaker they still stand for something pure in a morally polluted world. The irony. Many of the same lawmakers crying about fairness in women's sports have done next to nothing to fund women's programs, enforce Title IX, or pay women athletes equitably. They will defend a trophy ceremony before they'll defend maternity leave. That's not protection. That's performance. And performance has always been America's favorite substitute for repentance. The crowd doesn't care whether the policy works. They just want to see the spectacle of someone being cast out, the symbolic purge that says, we are still righteous. This is not new. When Pilate washed his hands, the crowd cheered. The washing wasn't justice, it was theater. The liberal feedback loop now. Here's where progressives often miss the mark. Every panic needs an echo, and the left provides it faithfully. Each conservative bill sparks an equal and opposite overreaction. Hashtags erupt, statements pour out, corporations issue rainbow-colored apologies, and suddenly the entire discourse becomes a mirror maze of moral preening. The right thrives on the outrage of the left. The left needs the moral horror of the right. It's a symbiotic hysteria. And lost in the noise are the actual athletes, real human beings who train, sweat, and compete in good faith while the country uses their existence as a political prop. Both sides feed the spectacle. Conservatives use trans athletes to stoke fear. Liberals use them to showcase virtue. Neither side actually listens. It's all algorithms now. One side posts an image of a biological male towering over girls at a medal ceremony. The other side replies with slogans about liberation and tolerance. Both images flatten the human being in the frame into a talking point. We have turned flesh and blood into clickbait. And that's the real sin. The idolatry of certainty. Every age builds its own idols. Ours are made of identity. We no longer bow to golden calves, we worship the categories we've created. Conservative, liberal, male, female, victim, oppressor, each side clutching their label like a relic. And in that worship we forget that truth isn't a possession, it's a pursuit. The trans athlete controversy exposes our deeper sickness, the collapse of shared moral imagination. We've replaced discernment with declaration. We don't ask what's right, we ask which side are you on. Scripture warns us about this temptation. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. But we don't believe that anymore. We've convinced ourselves the enemy is flesh and blood, the athlete, the parent, the neighbor, the teacher. And so we fight shadows, calling it righteousness. We demonize children and call it protection. We legislate fear and call it order. That's idolatry, plain and simple, the worship of our own certainty. The false idol of fairness, let's talk about fairness, because every politician in this conversation claims to be defending it. Fairness is the altar where both sides pray, but neither side practices what they preach. Fairness isn't just about who wins the race, it's about who even gets to start it. If fairness truly mattered, we'd be talking about the socio-economic gap that keeps millions of girls, cisgender and trans alike, from access to sports. We'd be addressing inequity in facilities, scholarships, nutrition, healthcare. But those conversations don't trend. It's easier to moralize about a single podium photo than to confront how poverty and policy shape athletic opportunity. So fairness becomes a slogan, a way to sound virtuous while doing nothing. And that's why this panic feels spiritual. Because it's not about the athletes, it's about our hunger for purity. We want a world without complexity, without ambiguity, without discomfort. But the gospel never promised us comfort. It promised us truth. The seventh. The mirror we refuse to face. If you want to know why this panic caught fire, look not at the trans athletes, look at the rest of us. We're exhausted by uncertainty. Gender, politics, technology, faith, everything feels fluid. So we reach for something, anything that feels fixed. The trans body becomes the battlefield because it embodies what terrifies us, change that cannot be undone. Conservatives call it moral decay. Progressives call it liberation. Both are reacting to the same anxiety that the old world is fading faster than we can replace it. But beneath all the shouting lies a question that no policy can answer. What happens to a people who fear mystery more than they fear lies? Because that's where we are now, a culture that prefers clarity to compassion, certainty to wisdom, safety to truth. And in that trade, we have sold our soul for simplicity. The eighth. The call to maturity, fear, is a child's reflex. Faith is an adult's discipline. When Paul wrote, "When I was a child, I thought like a child," he was describing more than age. He was describing the moral evolution from panic to peace. America hasn't made that leap yet. We still tremble at shadows. We still mistake disagreement for danger. we still believe our safety depends on someone else's exclusion. 10 athletes out of 500,000 and the mightiest nation on earth collapses into hysterics. That's not moral strength. That's spiritual infancy. The mature response would be to say, this is complex but manageable. To recognize that policy can evolve without persecution, that fairness and compassion aren't enemies, but maturity doesn't sell. Rage does. And so the circus continues, each side juggling scripture, science, and slogans until the crowd forgets what truth ever looked like. The ninth, the kingdom versus the crowd. There's an old truth that should haunt us here. The crowd that shouted Hosanna on Sunday shouted crucify him by Friday. Crowds are fickle. They can be whipped into holiness or hatred with the same rhythm. This current panic over athletes, bathrooms, pronouns, flags is just the latest chant in that ancient cycle. 1 week it's drag queens, the next it's vaccines, the next it'll be something else entirely. The crowd never runs out of enemies because fear never runs out of fuel. But the kingdom of God doesn't operate on panic. It operates on peace, discernment, and love that casts out fear. And that's the test before us. Can a nation saturated in fear rediscover faith, not in politicians or parties, but in truth itself? X. The closing benediction, if there is any moral to this madness, it's this: truth doesn't panic. The God of Scripture never once told his people to be afraid of small numbers. Gideon's army won with 300. The disciples turned the world upside down with 12. And yet we, with all our technology and wealth, tremble at 10 college athletes. That's not righteousness. That's cowardice dressed as conviction. The real battle isn't in locker rooms or courts, it's in hearts. It's the daily choice between fear and faith, between clinging to our certainties or walking humbly into complexity. To the conservatives weaponizing fear, you are building idols of purity, not pillars of justice. To the progressives chasing virtue clout, you are turning compassion into performance art. Both sides have mistaken noise for light. The time has come for a deeper courage, one that refuses to build moral crusades on the backs of children, one that seeks understanding rather than applause. Because if we can't handle 10 athletes without collapsing into moral hysteria, how will we ever handle the real tests that await us: poverty, war, climate, inequality, despair? We cannot afford another generation ruled by panic. Fear builds walls, faith builds nations. And only one of those will stand when the crowd moves on to its next target. Epilogue. If you really want to protect something sacred, protect your ability to see truth clearly. Protect your neighbor's humanity. Protect your peace from those who profit off your outrage. 10 athletes didn't break America. Our fear did. And only faith, not in our side, but in something higher, can mend it. Subscribe to Darrell McLean, launched 6 months ago, cultural critic and overthinking intellectual with a theological edge. Writing sharp takes on politics, faith, and society, always questioning, always digging deeper.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Darrell McLean Show. The Darrell McLean Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Darrell McLean Show.